So if you have a more anxious parent, one, if it's the mother, you're going to feel that in the womb. But then, as a child, you're going to feed off of that. What happens in the brain is we have these receptors, and they're kind of like this. And when the traumatic thing happens, they're separated. And now these receptors that send these messaging systems to help us regulate emotions and things, they're not connecting. And so then if we don't get therapy right away, if we don't understand that we've gone through something traumatic, because sometimes we might have gone through something and we're acting differently, but we don't necessarily notice it until a couple years later, right? Then the brain absorbs these receptors, and now we have less receptors in our brain to give us messages and when we think about mental health, our brain is an organ just like any other part of our body, right? If something's wrong with our brain, we don't talk about it because it changes our behavior. So people see the behavior and think they're just lazy, they're emotional, they're irritable. That's behavior, but that's not necessarily the case. It's because the organ that causes that behavior is malfunctioning. So trauma first is really anything that we perceive as life-threatening, as just very scary, and it doesn't even have to have been something that happened to us.
Hello, people. Welcome once again to our podcast. On this podcast, we bring you entertaining topics around love, faith, relationships, social issues, true life stories, and everything in between. And on today's episode, I have another wonderful guest, and I have my co-host joining me today. So welcome, Leah. Welcome, Amaka.
Awesome.
So nice to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So just a quick intro on Leah. Leah DeMarest is an Iowa licensed mental health counselor, certified alcohol and drug counselor, author and public speaker. She's the author of Through the Fog, a guide to caring for loved ones with mental illness. We're going to be talking a lot about mental health. There's a lot of stigma about it, and Leah will be helping us dispel all of those myths. I'm so sorry, I can't get my words together this morning.
It's still morning time.
Yeah, welcome, Leah. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, Leah, let's just go straight to the point. So, Leah, can you please tell us more about yourself, your background? How will you describe yourself? Everything you want us to know about.
Well, absolutely. So you said I'm a therapist. So on the daily, I work with individuals struggling with mental illness, as well as, like family therapy, couples therapy, things like that. That's what I do on the daily. Really what brought me to mental health and being in this field is, one, I worked in the social services for quite some time. I've always wanted to be in the helping field, doing something where I can help people. And so I was working in social services and working with kids a lot. And this is kind of just where I landed. I was just really interested in psychology and helping others. I do have people in my life who struggle with mental illness, and that's also kind of a driving factor too, just to gain more information on that I went to school to learn that. So it's kind of just in the background too, in family.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. So will you say you chose the profession just mostly because of what was happening around you, your family members? I see.
Yep.
Wow, that's interesting. I've heard a lot about social workers. So for social workers aren't necessarily therapists, right?
No.
They're not. Okay.
No, you can have a social work degree, and as a social worker, you provide services, help support, advocate for people. They can do therapy, but not all social work jobs are therapy type jobs.
I see. Okay, that's interesting. So why is mental health important? And what is mental health? I think let's start with that.
Yeah. Well, mental health basically is just general self-care, right? So if we take care of our physical health, we're taking care of our mental health. They're very much linked. Mental health is a common saying, because for so long we would go and we'd take care of our bodies and to the doctor, get our physicals. but they never really talked about the brain, what's going on. And just until recently, the last 10 years or so, they started, having those questionnaires, how are you feeling? Do you feel sad, depressed, all that? But it's really, it's part of our general health. And, anyone can get a mental illness. It's not contagious, but, life events can cause mental illness. Some of us are also born more susceptible to mental illness due to genetic makeup, and just how our brain is formed.
Interesting. That was going to be my question. One of my questions was, is it genetic? Are some people more predisposed to mental health than others?
Yes,
so it actually is.
Yeah. It kind of, if there's a family history, we're definitely more predisposed to potentially have a mental illness ourselves. If in the womb there's any sort of trauma while we're in the womb, or during pregnancy.
When we're in the womb? Really?
Yeah.
So what kind of trauma in the womb?
Let's say the mother is stressed and she's producing a lot of stress hormones that can change the genetic makeup of the child. If the mother's anxious, if they're going through trauma and stress, that's causing those chemicals to also be fed to the child. And so then now the child is going to be born maybe more susceptible to have anxiety. And so that type of stuff, but then also birthing trauma. So people who have had, maybe they were born with the umbilical cord around their neck, or had to spend some time in the NICU for whatever reason, things like that. Sometimes that causes it, as well as drug use. If the mother's using drugs while they're pregnant, that also changes the child's genetic makeup. And a lot of drug-addicted children get diagnosed with ADHD, but really their diagnosis should just be drug-addicted child. And they have very similar symptoms as ADHD, but then there's also anxiety involved with that, some depression, but it should be drug-addicted child, but they have anxiety, depression, and impulsivity. So if the mother is using drugs, so there's a lot that can happen just by even before birth that can cause mental illness.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And then I know you said some people are more prone to it. So the same way you would you also say that some people are prone to have more, be more happy or happier than other people, just based on their genetic disposition? Okay.
Yes, definitely. And all that, it goes into how they were developed in the womb, but then also what's their family's genetic makeup. But so if you have a more anxious parent, or you're going to, if it's the mother, you're going to feel that in the womb. But then as you are in, as a child, you're going to feed off of that. If you have an anxious parent, you're going to feel that anxiety from them, which then changes how you think and feel and changes the way that your brain reacts to certain things. So that's kind of how we can develop those types of mental illnesses. Is when we're children, our brains just soak up information. We soak up so much. So just as we're learning how to speak and talk, we're also seeing, okay, how do they react to this type of situation? Do they feel like, does our parent feel very much like they need to have control in everything? We're going to feel that from them, and then it causes us to have a physical response as well.
Okay. Yeah. Wow, that is so new. No one has ever talked about that. Before birth, during when a mom is pregnant. I feel so if we're screening for children for physical symptoms, we should also be screening kids to see if they have that higher disposition to
That's why they say pregnant women should take their rest. Don't stress yourself. Just be relaxed and, just have an easygoing pregnancy.
Yeah.
It's not just because of you, but because of the baby. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Thanks, Leah, for sharing that. I never knew. I don't think wow. Okay. Awesome. So I feel like recently mental health is top of mind for a lot of people, right? Compared to maybe 20 years ago, even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? I think in the past we excused a lot of poor behaviors from
Yeah.
people. That is just who they are. But
Yeah.
why do you think mental health is
Um,
taking so much?
I think really it's just people started talking about it. In the past, we had this mentality of, okay, suck it up,
Mm-hmm.
that type of mentality, the really strict parents that's like, okay, well, I had to do it this way, so you do too, type of a thing. And, so we would just suck it up. We would not talk about it. Not a lot of families didn't talk about their thoughts and feelings. Dad doesn't want to hear about this. Mom is too busy. So I'm not going to talk about that. But now there's just been more, I think, just more education on it. There's been a lot that we've learned, again, like with the stuff I just told you in regards to like the childbirth and all that, how all that really affects us and creates who we are as adults. So because of the education, people are starting to talk more about it when they learn that from their physician, or if they're implementing it in schools, or they're telling the teachers. And now all of a sudden we're doing certain screenings, like, okay, this kid seems to have a lot of heightened behaviors, now we can do a screening. Before, they didn't have a lot of those. So I think we're catching things early on, because there's been more education, there's been more talk, more research.
I see. Wow, that's really good. Yeah, that's interesting. I know whenever I go for my doctor's visit, they always ask those questions. I'm like, I came
Yeah.
for physical, not mental health. So why you ask me all these questions
Yeah, exactly. And that wasn't really a thing even
before?
20 years ago.
Yeah.
It just, they didn't have those screenings. But now we're talking mental health is health, and if our mental health isn't doing well, then our physical health is not going to do well either, right? Like, if I'm feeling depressed and unmotivated, I'm not going to go run, I'm not going to go work out, I'm not going to be eating right. I'm going to go for those craving type foods, or I'm not going to eat at all, I'm going to be sleeping. So when we think of our mental health, it is a part of our overall health. So if I'm taking care of my physical health, I'm also taking care of my mental health. And when we think about mental health, our brain is an organ just like any other part of our body, right? Like, if our heart, if there's an issue with our heart, we go to a cardiologist, we talk about it, we get time off from work. But in the past, something's wrong with our brain, what do? We don't talk about it, because it changes our behavior. So people see the behavior and think, they're just lazy, they're emotional, they're irritable. That's behavior. That's not, they can change that, but that's not necessarily the case. It's because the organ that causes that behavior is malfunctioning. So just like if you have a blood clot in your heart, we would treat that with medication, going to the doctor, getting certain treatments. Well, what are we going to do with our organ up here if it's malfunctioning and it's causing us to be more irritable? Well, we got to go to the doctor. We got to figure out if medication is the right treatment, if therapy is the right treatment, both. Is there something else going on in the brain? So that's the thing, is we never in the past looked at the brain really as an organ like the heart, the lungs. It was just, they're having goofy behaviors. Let's put them on some sort of employment plan and then fire them, or whatever one plan.
Right.
So I have a question, because now this just threw light into what normally we see. So we do have an upcoming generation, or the younger generation, that is very aware of their mental health. They take time off. They know, like, oh, this is a mental health issue. And we have the older generation that, like you said, suck it up. I did it this way, so you should do it this way. So how do you bridge that gap where one, especially in the workforce, for example, because varieties, different generations in the workforce, so even at home, how do you bridge this gap where there is a more, like, a generation that is more enlightened towards their mental health, and then a generation that has always done it ways that probably worked for them or did not work for them, but still want to like enforce it on the younger ones because that's the way we've always done it. So
Yeah.
I think
It is really tough because one, with the older generation, they're older, so they've been doing it one way for so long, it's become a habit. It's hard to change habits. It's not, it can be done, but you're getting older and you've done this for 60 years.
Mhm.
How are you going to change my mind, type of a thing. So it is tough. It can happen. But one, it's about communication. So just continually communicating what is mental illness, what is mental health, giving that education, those resources, those trainings to people in the workforce to get more, even if it's a parent or someone that just doesn't understand that you might feel anxious or have some sort of mental illness, giving them information on your diagnosis, giving them information on how you're feeling, like how does anxiety feel to you, how does depression feel like to you, because everybody's different on how they feel. Just continually giving them information. It's up to them to then change that behavior, to take in the information. So that's another thing, is there's only so much we can control. We can control how we educate them and how we communicate with them, but ultimately they have to be the ones to accept that information and to change that behavior. So ultimately it's just giving a lot of information.
yeah, yeah, I hear you.
Yeah,
I think education is like one of the ways that we can help mitigate that gap too, as well.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really like this generation. I like the Gen Z. I like how they take care of themselves, honestly, I mean, I think there should be a balance though, because sometimes I feel like they are too soft. Sorry to say that, Gen Zs.
Yeah,
Gen Z is great.
yeah.
Sometimes you just have to wear your big pants, wear your big girl's pants, and just keep moving, okay?
There does need to be a balance, but that's the same
Yeah.
thing, right? So if you're having any other physical health issue, okay, yeah, I feel sick, but am I well enough to still do my job so I don't lose my job, so that I can continue to earn the income to pay my bills? So that's a little bit of work ethic as well goes into it.
That's true, actually. That's a good way to look at it. Because I mean, your brain it controls everything, it directs everything. So we should, really pay attention to it. So I wanted to ask, right? And that's what you're also trying to do. That's your message as well. So there's a lot of stigma around mental health, right?
Yeah.
Like in my community where I come from, mental health is not what anyone wants to be identified with. Because when you say mental health, it's almost like saying the person is mad or is out of their mind, right? So
Yeah.
what are the different mental health conditions? Can you, like, in a layman's term, just explain to us what mental health
When you
looks like?
think about it, okay, so when we think about stigma, how mental illness is displayed in the movies, right? Like the movie Psycho, and typically a person with mental illness is a serial killer, right? Like, and they're going mad, and they're hearing voices and all that stuff, and seeing things, but that's not always what it's like. You can see hallucinations and auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations, and not go the crazy way that movies are showing, right? Like you can see those things and then have good coping skills and still be productive in society. And so there are, typically it's like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. Those are the things that are really shown a lot in movies and things. But to be honest, like the majority of people with mental illness are not criminals. They are not violent.
They're not out of their mind.
Yeah, they're not
Okay.
out of their
They're
mind.
not crazy.
They're not crazy. Okay.
And so that's the thing, is to understand that like people with mental illness are your neighbors, your teachers, your bosses, your preacher. Anybody can have a mental illness, and it's not depicted by gun violence or getting arrested and all that stuff. It's they just might need a day off every once in a while.
Okay. So what are the mental illnesses there are today? Is depression considered mental health? A
Yeah.
mental illness is okay.
So I mean, there's hundreds, thousands. So there's a thing that's called the DSM-5. That's where you get all the diagnosis
Okay.
from. But there's so many different ones. But typical ones that I see quite often, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorder, borderline. Those ones are major ones. So depression and anxiety often go together. Quite often that when someone is anxious, they often develop depression too, because you can feel anxious, and then maybe you're not performing correctly at work, or it's affecting something, and then all of a sudden you start to feel depressed because of that. So then they can actually create one another as well. So you can have one mental illness and it can create another one because it affects so many parts of life. Bipolar disorder, so there's different levels of bipolar, 1, 2, 3, and so they all have kind of different things, but definitely bipolar is one that where you'll have ups and down emotions. So they have manic, which that emotion is like a lot of energy, staying awake for days on end, and going on shopping sprees with money that they don't have, like spending all their money, and all of a sudden, oh, I don't have money for my bills. And then that can go on for weeks, months, and then all of a sudden like, oh crap, now I'm in a depressive state. So then they go from manic to depressive. So that's what bipolar is kind of has those ups and downs types of things, and can be impulsive during mania. Borderline personality, there's a lot of with borderline, like irritability with borderline, some hyper focus on certain things. So like certain things might make them feel irritable, and then they really like go after that. Borderline is something that is created. It's not something that you would be born with. That is something that maybe they went through a trauma, and then kind of caused, develop this borderline, or they've grown up with a parent with mental illness, and it created that.
Does narcissistic personality disorder also fall there?
That would, that's similar to those two. Can be very similar in traits. So there's a lot that are developed, but then there's others that like you're typically born with, but then they aren't always caught, like schizophrenia. It wouldn't be caught in adolescence. It wouldn't be caught when they're toddlers, but then as they grow, it's more like, okay, no, this is schizophrenia. They might get other diagnoses, but things aren't really lining up. And then, so schizophrenia is also one that you don't get diagnosed until you're older with that anyways. So it's something that would be something that your brain developed, and so that's not something that was created,
I see.
But then, so when we talk about trauma, you kind of asked a little bit about trauma too. So that trauma in childhood can cause so much, change in our adulthood. So trauma first is really anything that we perceive as life-threatening, just very scary, and it doesn't even have to have been something that happened to us. So it could be like people who witnessed 9/11, on TV, on the news. Just seeing that can cause them to have a reaction that now causes them maybe to not want to leave their home, and so they become agoraphobic. So not leaving the home, they become scared, like, well, if I go and I work in my building, is that one going to fall? Is something going to happen? So it can just be even seeing it, or knowing somebody that has gone through a trauma can cause a reaction. So a lot of people think trauma is like something you were abused and it happened to you specifically, but you might just have seen something on the news even, and it can be caused in the brain. Other traumas can be like divorce, so that some people don't see that as trauma, but it
Mm.
is. Like, when you think of divorce, it disrupts the whole family dynamic, right?
Mm.
Sometimes it's very toxic, so they're fighting, and it you maybe as a child you have to pick sides, and there's all that. So when you think of that type of trauma, like, that changes the way our brain develops too. So when we think about things that have happened, and definitely, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, car accidents, natural disasters. So if you had been through a hurricane, a tornado, a flood, something like that, that can all also feel traumatic and cause trauma. But when we think about when those things happen to us, what happens in the brain is we have these receptors, and they're kind of like this. And when the traumatic thing happens, they're separated. And now these receptors that send these messaging systems to help us regulate emotions and things, they're not connecting. And so then if we don't get therapy right away, if we don't understand that we've gone through something traumatic, because sometimes we might have gone through something and we're acting differently, but we don't necessarily notice it until a couple years later, right? We don't get therapy right away. There's other things that we can do, but if we don't get any type of treatment, well, then what happens if we don't get that treatment? Then the brain absorbs these receptors, and now we have less receptors in our brain to give us messages like, when we feel pain or when we want to calm ourselves, those receptors are no longer there to send those messages. And that's the same with those endorphins and stress chemicals and things, right? When something traumatic happens, it spikes in that moment, and then it can become, those things can become dysregulated. And then now, how do we re-regulate those? Well, we have to go to therapy or have medication to try to regulate those types of things. But if we don't get it right away, some people don't realize that they're acting differently or feeling differently for quite some time. Like, something may happen when they're a child, and then they don't go to therapy until they're 25. So then now their brain has been working out of whack for how many years?
So many years.
Yeah.
And not even knowing. Wow. So those things, like, so when similar situations like that happen, it becomes like triggers, right? For that, even though, because I know sometimes.
The thing in our brain that is the fire alarm, is what I call it. The fire alarm in our brain is the amygdala. And it's the fight, flight, freeze.
Yeah.
So when there's a trigger, so a car backfires, it's a loud noise, so let's say you're like a veteran that went to war, car backfires, that sounds like a gunshot. Just that sound causes me maybe to freeze. So that amygdala is triggered, and it causes some sort of chemical to go off in the brain. That stress chemical, or the stress chemical goes off, and then all of a sudden I'm being irritable to people around me. And I have no idea what happened. What was it? Sometimes we don't even see the triggers. It could have just been a tone of voice, a smell, a sound. So anything can be a trigger, and sometimes we don't even notice them. But those triggers, that's it. It makes those chemicals in the brain, go off, that fight, flight, freeze. And so, so the fight is usually like the anger. We show irritability. The fight is we retreat. We want to isolate, avoid certain places and things. And then the freeze is like, I'm stuck. I'm immobile in that moment, or like literally like my brain can't think. So if I'm at work and I hear a sound or a smell, all of a sudden what was I working on? My memory goes away. I can't focus, things like that. And it might just be because a coworker had a similar perfume to someone who abused me.
Wow. It's amazing how the brain works, honestly. Like, with everything you've explained, it's amazing. So it doesn't matter how many years ago it happened, maybe as a 5-year-old child, that trauma, if you don't deal with it, if you don't resolve it, it just stays stuck in your brain, and
And
down the future it keeps.
even if you go to treatment,
Yeah.
even if you have therapy, you may find coping skills, right? Coping skills to deal with it. You may have processed through it, but just because you've gone to treatment doesn't mean it goes away altogether. The intensity might reduce. You may be triggered less often, so maybe 1 out of 3 times there's that trigger, but not
Not like every time.
every time. So that's going to be maybe a lifelong thing, even if you go to treatment. So that's the thing too, is like therapy isn't like a magic wand and then I wish I
But
never.
Leah, is there such a thing as being because a lot of people use therapy speaks, they call it therapy speaks or so language now, right? So some people just remain in therapy. Is it something like I understand it has to be ongoing because I mean every year we go for our physicals or whatever, we take care
Yeah.
of ourselves, right? But do you think sometimes it could be excessive where people know all of this information but they are not applying it? Because I think one thing therapy does as well is it helps you become aware of your triggers,
Yes.
right? Because if you're not, just like you said, you could just become irritable all of a sudden. You're like, why am I? It's not the person who spoke to you. It's not, there's something that triggered right within you. So is there such a thing as being excessive with going
Yeah.
to therapy?
Yeah, I mean, because obviously not everybody needs to go to therapy for certain things. Like I do recommend therapy for everybody at some point. Even if it's not even trauma, whatever. Because in therapy you can even try to help with like life goals and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's not something that okay, I have to do every week for the rest of my life. Something like that. It's just maybe I'm going through a tough time right now, so I'm going to do therapy for 2 months. And then I'm going to stop and then see how life goes without therapy. And so it kind of like a chiropractor, right? Like we don't necessarily go to a chiropractor or massage therapist all the time, but we do need those every once in a while. So it just, if things are heightened, okay, let's do therapy. And then once things are getting steady again, okay, maybe let's do it less often. And then if it stays steady, let's try to in therapy for now. And if I need it again, I need it again. But there are some people that need to process things, on a weekly, bi-weekly basis for much of their life. And that's fine. But it's just sometimes people come and there's not a lot to talk about, and that's good. I like they do that because it needs to be.
Yeah. I remember when I just switched jobs during the COVID period, I was just so overwhelmed. And I think that was the first time I went into therapy because I was like, I don't like the way I feel. I just, just a lot of emotions, right? So I subscribed. And I think after maybe 3 months, I just felt like it was just hitting, like we're just rehashing the same thing, and it's almost like, what am I doing? So I stopped. So but I understand, like, for very critical, there are people who really actually need that on an ongoing basis. And
And the thing is too is coping skills can be weird because they might work, let's say, for a year. Your tried and true coping skills are like, yeah, they're working. Then sometimes for some people, not everybody, but for some people, these coping skills that are usually my tried and true, like, they're not working like they used to. Is there anything else you can throw at me? So sometimes people come back to get different coping skills because the ones that they're using is now not working. So then they get new coping skills. And so sometimes what I call it the ping pong effect, every 3 months maybe, okay, you have these coping skills, and if you're noticing that they're not working as effectively, okay, then now try this other group of coping skills. So ping ponging, going back and forth between this group of coping skills this 3 months, this group of coping skills this 3 months, and then kind of doing that way. Sometimes we just need new coping skills because our brains, like, it's almost like immune, to the same type of thing. And that's just some people. Some people get that, but some people, they can have the same coping skills for the rest of their lives, and it might work for them.
Right. No, therapy is very important, honestly. I feel like I'm a Christian, right? So in the Christian world, it's not, even though now people are becoming more open in the church. Amaka, would you agree with me when it comes to therapy and counseling? We even have some counselors who are actually trained mental health, who are trained mental health counselors. So it's really good because, like you said, a lot of things come at us. Like we've learned from you now that is it utero in the belly, some might have been transferred to you, and then going through life, a lot of traumatic experiences also combined, and then there's just a lot of things you're dealing with, your brain is having to fight through, but going through therapy will help you resolve all of that. So that will lead me to my next question, Leah. There's a lot of, when we watch the news, when we watch documentaries, a lot of stories about like these people who do very horrible things, right? Some of them are diagnosed as antisocial personality disorder, as having that, or being psychopaths, sociopaths. Are those also mental illness related, or are they just, what is that? I would like
Yeah,
to
those
know.
are mental illnesses.
Okay.
Yeah, and so different thing, like with those types of categories, like there are people that tend to not feel empathy, don't know how to put themselves in someone else's shoes, that type of thing. And so when you think of those, psychopath, sociopath, that's kind of narcissism. That's a developed type of trait, but it is on the mental illness spectrum. That narcissism is more about thinking about yourself, what's important in my world. Very manipulative, very hard for them to show and feel empathy. They can act it a little bit, but not really actually understand what it means. And that's kind of stuff develops because maybe they didn't have empathetic parents. They weren't shown how to love. They weren't shown basically how to interact with people in general. So they learned how to act. And then, there's probably other horrible things that happened to them. So then now they're numb to it, and they're thinking about themselves. Okay, it's all about me. That I need to make my world better. My goal, what I need. And so this is my goal. This is what I want to do. So it's my way or the highway type of a thing.
So they're created, they weren't born that way. They were actually created due to the experiences they went through. Wow. Well, how is it possible that two people from the same family, one develops that type of disorder and the other person doesn't?
Because we're different, as people, just like how two people can have different reactions to a medication, right? Or one person in one family can be allergic to something and another person can't, right? Our bodies are just different, and we have different personalities too. So one person might react to a trauma differently than their brother. It might feel more intense to them than their brother, because maybe that person is already more of an emotional side, in touch with their emotions, and their brother, like, they're really lackadaisical and easygoing, and things don't bother them that much. So then, so it sometimes comes down to personality as well, and how we deal with things in regards to how these things form, and how two people living in the same house can be completely different.
Maka, did you?
No, I had a question about just like preventative. I know we've talked about therapy, and I know, like, in my question is basically physically we're advised by the doctors, okay, go for exercise to like strengthen your body, weight train, lift, like carry weights to like strengthen your muscles and your bones. So my question is, for the brain, like you've talked about, is there any exercise you would say, or any preventative action that people can take to like be able to basically withstand the things that come at us, basically? Because like when life happens, like things will be thrown at you, and then you're expected to like make lemonade from lemons, right? So is there a way we can actually maybe make our brain stronger? Any preventative measure that we can take? I know we've talked about treatment if you're facing any tough situation, but what are some preventative like measures that we as individuals can take to protect our brain to be mentally strong?
Yeah, for sure. So as part of this too, I want to give you a little bit of background of where I kind of learned some of this stuff as well. So some of the things, so I've worked in a brain injury facility for a period of time. So I worked with people who, got in car accidents or whatever, had something that where their brain, had an injury. I've worked with dementia patients, so that also, there's different ways that our brain works when you start to decline in age. And I've worked with with addiction, right? So I'm a certified alcohol and drug counselor as well. And so I worked in facilities where we had drug addiction patients, and obviously their brains are damaged by drugs, right? In all these facilities, they all did the same thing. So relying on vitamins, so making sure we're getting pumped with the right types of vitamins. So I usually just recommend, if you're not taking multivitamin, just take one. For brain health, there's a plethora of vitamins to take for brain health, but major ones is A, B, C, D, magnesium, zinc. Those are all really big ones for brain health, and they're all in a multivitamin. I usually just say take a multivitamin. So making sure you're getting the right vitamins, whether through a multivitamin or through foods that you eat. Exercise, it creates those good feeling endorphins in our brain to help us to feel happy, to combat those negative thoughts and feelings. So if we're on a regular exercise routine, that helps to continue those endorphins on a more regular output, I guess, with them. If it's hard for you to keep an exercise routine and you're having kind of a low day, go walk up and down the stairs a few times. There's a thing called couch yoga now, so you can learn
couch yoga.
It's yoga, and I just say you have a 3-minute a commercial break with your show, do some couch yoga. So doing any sort of exercise, even on those low days, getting that blood pumping a little bit is going to help those endorphins get firing. So then maybe you can create more of that motivation. And then the other thing is brain games. So brain games are like Sudoku, crossword puzzles, word searches, the game of memory, right? Those types of games. There's been studies in regards to how those games can help strengthen those receptors in our brain to help improve our memory, improve the messaging systems to help us to read better, and actually retain the information, things like that. So those are like the 3 things that every single facility did, was exercise, vitamins, and brain games to heal our brain. Other things I tend to recommend, so therapy, so talking it out. There's when we talk things out, when we write things down, and when we think about them, we process differently in each of those realms. We tend to just keep things inside and think about them, and what happens is we have these anxious thoughts, and we just keep them going, and our brain gets fatigued. It's still good to sometimes think about those things, but when that makes us feel overwhelmed, write it down. So journaling, getting it out in some way. So journaling things, and then talking it out. So whether you go to therapy to talk it out, or having somebody that you can talk to. So if there's an issue with a person, okay, go to that person and talk to them about it. Communicate through this struggle, because it's not going to change if there's no communication, if you don't find a resolution. So why are we keeping it to ourselves and causing ourselves to get all anxious and frustrated? Go to them and actually talk about it. But having those support systems too, friends, family that we feel like we can talk to. And if we feel like it's overwhelming to go to those people, we want to have fun with those people, right? We don't want to burden them with stuff all the time. And if we feel like that's what's happening, then we go to therapy to talk it out, and you can come and vent or do whatever you need to do there. But yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you
that's
so much.
those are so helpful
Yeah.
tips. Like because like I like how you like outlined all of them, the exercise, the brain. Those are very, very helpful. So I had another question. Tuki,
Yeah.
can I go?
Yeah, sure. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So I know you talk about like therapy and like all about therapy. So I know that a lot of like barriers to therapy, people getting therapy, one of them will be financial implications,
Mhm.
like of going to therapy. Are there resources or low cost therapy? What options do you have for people that can't? Because we have a wide variety of people that are watching. Some
Yep.
people can afford therapy,
Yep.
some can't.
Mhm.
What options do you have for people that cannot maybe necessarily afford therapy on a long term basis? Are
Yeah.
they do we have low cost options or what do we have out there?
It kind of depends on what state you live in
Okay.
and like where you actually live, like what types of options are there, because there are um in Iowa here we have Medicaid and Medicare, right? So some people have those
Mhm.
as insurance options, and most of the time when you use those insurance options to go to therapy, it tends to be free for the patient.
Oh
Mm.
wow, really?
Yeah, but also you have to find a therapist that um accepts that
Mhm.
Medicaid,
Okay.
Medicare. So not all therapists accept that. um Insurance tends to pay for a huge majority of the bill. I think a lot of people's copays, depending on what your insurance company is, but a lot of people's copays are $20 a time. Some people it's like
Mm. That's
10.
not bad.
So it kind of depends on your insurance as well. But then sliding fee scales. There are a lot of therapists and clinics that have sliding fee scales. And so that's another thing to look into when you go look for therapy. Do they have a scale that goes off of my budget, like a income based
Mm.
payment plan, things like that? Because there's a lot of people that do pay zero because of their income.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
That's
that's
good to know.
good. That's
Yeah.
I didn't even know Medicare and Medicaid covered therapy.
Great.
That's
Mhm.
actually good, so that
Yep.
everyone can afford it, right?
Yep.
It means everyone, or let me not say everyone, but people who are on those programs, which is yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, wow, this has been a wonderful talk. So just in wrapping us up now, Leah, can you tell us more about your therapy business, or like what kind of therapy do you offer and how can people reach out to you and all of that?
Yeah, so currently, so the business is Flourishing Engagements. That's the name of my company.
Okay.
I work here in Iowa because I have an Iowa license. Um, so I have virtual therapy. So I
Oh,
do like
virtual. Good.
therapy via like Zoom, or I'm
Okay.
on a handful. There's a different apps and stuff, so you can go through these different apps. But even though it's virtual, like if I was in Iowa and you're in Colorado, I still can't see you, which is kind of silly because it doesn't matter, to me. I think, well, if they're in Colorado or if they're in the town next to me, what's the difference, right? Like
Yeah.
it's the same type, but because of certain laws that are currently in place, because my license is in Iowa, my patient has to be in Iowa, even if it's virtual.
Oh,
Hopefully,
really?
yeah, so maybe someday that will change. And if I leave the state, so let's say I'm on vacation and I go on vacation to Florida or something, I cannot take patients during that time, even if I want to do virtual patients, because I'm not currently physically in the state that I have my license.
I don't understand you guys medical. Like people have a lot of restrictions in
Yeah,
that field.
So if you took a vacation to Florida and your patient was an Iowa patient, you can't see them because
no,
you're physically in Florida.
Oh,
I am not. Yep. And it's different. So that's for therapists, but it's different for psychiatrists and also some therapists can, so like they might be dually licensed. So
Hmm.
let's say I was licensed in Iowa and in Florida, so
oh, I see.
then I can be in Iowa and see Florida patients, or be in Florida and still see patients as well. So it kind of depends on where you're licensed and if you can physically um
I see.
see. But that's the thing, for right now, for therapists, you have to be where
You
you're
have to be aware. So if someone wanted to reach out to you virtually, they also have to reside in Iowa.
yeah.
Oh wow. And maybe I
Yeah,
should have asked. Go ahead.
I say, but so so my practice is Flourishing Engagements. That's what it's called. I am on social media, so you can find Flourishing Engagements. You can either go by Flourishing Engagements or my name, and find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all those.
Yeah. I'm
So,
going to get all those details and put it in the description box. Yeah. After this, if you don't mind sending them to me, I would include them to this episode. Yeah, so
yeah.
they can reach you. Okay, well, that's awesome. So, and Leah, you also have written a book, Through the Fog, A Guide to Caring for Loved Ones with Mental Illness. Can you touch a bit about that quickly as we round up?
Yeah. So, okay, I have them with me. So this one is the workbook.
Oh, it looks so
So,
beautiful. I like the
yeah.
purple.
So that's the workbook, and then this is the book that goes with it. So you can buy them separately, but I always recommend to get the workbook with the book, because what you get with the workbook is you'll get a plan for how to care for your loved. So what my book really gives you is information about mental illness. So what is mental illness? What are different types of mental illness? It gives you information on how to best support your loved one with mental illness, and different things in regards to how to best communicate to them, how to help them seek care, set up financially for them, when they can't have jobs and things like that. So how to help them through that stuff. It gives all that type of information. And then the last chapter it's self-care for the caregiver too. So how do I take care of myself when I'm going through all this stress? And it also has resources listed on what are different resources I can find online within my community, different nonprofits and things that help caregivers and people with mental illness with these types of situations. So it has all that information in the workbook. What it gives you is, so it goes with each of the chapters, and you basically just you're taking notes with the chapter of, okay, how do I best communicate with my person specifically? So I'm going to write this down. This is what I think, how I'm going to do it this way. This is how I can best communicate. These are my person's triggers. What can I do when they're triggered in this way? And so it kind of gives you, by the end of it, you have basically a personalized guide of, okay, that you can flip to, like, okay, my loved one is currently having panic attacks. What did I say that I could do when that happens? So you have basically a guide of various scenarios that you could go through. So I just recommend getting the workbook with the book, because you'll get the information plus your own guide, basically.
That is awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I'm sure people listening, would be able to. And where can they find the book?
Yeah, so Amazon, you can find the book at Amazon, Target, Walmart, Barnes and Noble. So any of the
major stores. Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. That's really nice. I never knew a book like this existed, because I feel like, people, what do? I don't know what to do. But just having all of those instructions, word for word, is helpful. Thank you so much. Yeah. And then, so finally, what are you working on right now? And do you have any last word for our listeners? What advice do you want to give to them?
Yeah, I think really it's just, one, if you're struggling, don't be afraid to reach out, whether it's to a friend or to ask for help from a therapist. Don't be afraid to reach out. Also, I'm noticing that at businesses, people are becoming, like, bosses are becoming more aware and more, like, empathetic towards mental illness. They have more knowledge, so they're helping. And so I'm noticing that. And then, so don't be afraid to go to your boss. And then the other thing is just, when you're a caregiver, when you're someone that's wanting to support somebody with mental illness, one thing that you can do is just be there for them. It doesn't mean you don't have to talk, just listen. Sometimes that's all we need, is to listen, someone to listen to us, or to sit. Maybe they're not feeling the best. They don't know what to say, don't know what to do, but maybe going and watching a movie with them. They don't want to be alone. It's just the simple things. It doesn't mean you have to solve the world's problems for them. It's just being there. And so that's the biggest thing. So.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Like the power of presence. Like that's how I think about it. You don't really have to say anything, just be there. I do like that one.
Yep.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Leah. I've gained so much knowledge, additional knowledge. Honestly, I'm so intrigued by this topic. I love talking about this because I feel like it's very important. So thank you so much for adding to my my knowledge bank here. Really grateful. Any other thing, Amaka? Are we done?
No, I just want to say thank you for shedding more light, sharing your knowledge with us. I feel like people that take out the time to actually write down their knowledge deserve like an accolade. It's not easy being like an author. So thank you for putting down all your years of hard work, putting them in the book so that other people can learn. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank
you for having me on here. I always enjoy talking about mental health and giving more information. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening, for watching. I'm going to have all of Leah's information in the description box of the YouTube video and the show notes of the podcast. Please engage with her, reach out to her. In fact, I am so blown by everything I've learned today. Buy the book. Let's support Leah. Thank you so much. And please keep coming back for more wonderful topics. See you next time. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.